Those old journals are such a fire hazard, Margaret. Jessica's voice carried across my kitchen with false concern. All that yellowed paper stacked everywhere. It's honestly dangerous at your age. I stood at my stove making pancakes, the same recipe I'd perfected over 60 years. My handwritten journals sat on the kitchen counter, where they'd lived for the past 43 years. Jessica picked up the top journal dismissively, the leather cover worn smooth from decades of use. What do you even write in these things? Shopping lists and doctor appointments? I write about life, I said quietly, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. About family, memories, important moments. But it's all just random thoughts, Jessica continued, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining obvious things, nothing anyone would ever want to read. My son Robert sat at the breakfast table, saying nothing to defend his mother. The same table where I'd served thousands of meals with love and care. Jessica opened the journal to a random page. See? Just rambling about gardening, and some story about Robert's childhood. None of this matters to anyone. None of this matters. 43 years of document. Our family's journey through joy and sorrow, reduced to meaningless rambling by someone who'd known us for only 5 years. We really should clear out all this clutter, she said, setting the journal down like contaminated material. Make room for things that actually serve a purpose. As if preserving family history had no value in her modern world, as if memories written in my own hand were less important than her digital convenience. Robert finally spoke, but not in my defense. Maybe Mom could use a computer instead, keep everything organized electronically, where one power outage or technical failure could erase decades of carefully preserved thoughts and experiences. Silence isn't surrender, it's strength, gathering its breath. I'm Margaret Thompson. I live in Oak Grove, Wisconsin. I've been writing in journals every day for 43 years without missing a single entry. I raised 3 children and buried a husband. I documented it all with careful attention. Today, my daughter-in-law called my life's work a fire hazard and meaningless clutter, while eating pancakes I made from scratch, in the kitchen where every memory began. But what Jessica doesn't know is this: those journals hold more than daily observation. They hold secrets that could change everything about her assumptions and our family's future. If you've ever felt overlooked in your own home, you'll understand why this moment stayed with me. This house on Cedar Lane has witnessed 45 years of family life, every joy, every heartbreak, every ordinary Tuesday that somehow became precious in memory. I started writing journals when Robert was born, a new mother wanting to capture every milestone and precious moment, the first smile, first word, first step, all documented in careful handwriting. The kitchen still smells like vanilla and butter, from decades of birthday cakes and Sunday morning. I can hear the echoes of children's laughter in every creaking floorboard and settling beam. My journals live on the counter, within easy reach of daily life. 43 leather-bound volumes chronicling our family's evolution through time and change. Each journal represents 1 year of life, written in my careful cursive, blue ink for ordinary days, red ink for special occasion, black ink for sorrows that needed documenting. The early journals overflow with baby milestone, Robert's first tooth, first haircut, first day of school. Later volumes chronicle teenage challenges, dating disasters, college application, wedding preparation. Some truths arrive quietly, but change everything. After Thomas died 7 years ago, my writing became even more important, a way to process grief and loneliness, a method for staying connected to the woman I'd been before widowhood changed everything. Jessica sees only cluttered paper, taking up valuable counter space. She doesn't understand that these journals are my autobiography written in real time, my legacy preserved in permanent ink. She wants me to modernize everything, use computers and smartphone like someone my age should abandon the methods that have served me faithfully for over 4 decades. Robert inherited his father's gentle nature, but also Thomas's conflict avoidance. He loves me, but wants peace with his wife, more than justice. For his mother's life choices, Jessica means well in her efficient way. She sees problems that need solving, inefficiencies that require updating, but she's never understood that something can't be measured in practical. My journals aren't clutter or fire hazard. They're the heartbeat of our family, the proof that our lives mattered, the evidence that love endures, even when the people disappear. The criticism started small, like hairline cracks in a foundation that seems perfectly solid. Jessica would comment on my old-fashioned habit during her weekly visits to check on me. All this handwriting must be so tiring, she'd say. Why not just talk into your phone? It could transcribe everything automatically. She'd point out the space my journals occupy. This counter could be so much more functional, with a proper coffee station or microwave cart. My coffee station, where I'd made morning coffee for 45 years without needing improvement, where my journals sat like faithful friends, ready to receive the day's thoughts. Digital storage is so much safer, she'd continue. What? If there was a fire or flood? All these irreplaceable memories would be gone. Irreplaceable memories. She understood their value, but wanted to change their form to something she considered more secure, more modern and appropriate. Dignity whispers what anger cannot. The real pressure began when Jessica started bringing organizing supplies, storage boxes, and filing systems to help you streamline your space. She'd flip through my journals quickly. So much repetition in here. Daily weather reports, grocery lists mixed in with actual important events, as if she could determine which moments of my life deserved preservation and which were wastes of precious paper and time. We should edit these, she suggested. Keep only the significant entry. Create a condensed version that's easier to manage and store properly. Edit my life. Remove the ordinary Tuesdays. That made extraordinary moments meaningful. Eliminate the daily texture. That gave context to major events. Robert nodded along with her suggestion, not enthusiastically, but without resistance. The path of least domestic conflict. Rather than defending his mother's choices, a home remembers the hands that built it. Jessica began questioning my daily writing routine. Do you really need to write? Every single day? Surely some days nothing worth recording actually happens. Nothing worth recording. As if the simple act of being alive and observant wasn't inherently valuable. As if witnessing daily life didn't deserve documentation. She suggested I take breaks. Give yourself permission to skip days when you don't feel inspired. Writing should be enjoyable, not obligatory. But she missed the point entirely. Writing wasn't about inspiration, it was about commitment, to paying attention, to staying present, to believing that every day offered something worth noticing. I began to understand her real concern wasn't about my convenience or safety, it was about her discomfort, with habits she couldn't understand, methods she couldn't control or modernize. Spring brought longer days and deeper concern. Jessica's visits became more focused on organizing my possessions. According to her vision of appropriate living, she'd arrive with boxes and labels. Today we tackle the journal situation, figure out what's worth keeping, and what can finally be donated. Donated, as if my personal writings were items for charity shops rather than private thoughts. Never intended for strangers' eyes. Nobody reads physical books anymore, she'd say. Personal journals are even more outdated. Everything's digital now. Much more practical. She'd stack my journals efficiently, like library books being sorted for different purposes and destinations. We could scan the important parts. Keep digital copies of anything that really matters to family. Important parts? Determined by someone who'd never read them carefully, who didn't understand the connection between ordinary moments and meaningful memory. Some objects hold memories, not value. I started paying closer attention to Jessica's real motivation behind this organizing campaign. She measured my kitchen counter, like someone planning renovation. This space has so much potential, she'd murmur. With proper planning and modern fixtures, it could be truly functional, as if 45 years of family meals and conversation hadn't proven the space worked perfectly for its intended purpose. My journals documented more than personal thoughts. They contained family information Jessica had never bothered to read. Financial details, property records, important dates. That might surprise someone who assumed she knew everything relevant, including documentation of promises made and agreements reached about inheritance and future plans that Robert had forgotten, but I had carefully preserved. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. Jessica thought my journals were sentimental clutter, written by a lonely widow, with too much time and too little modern sense about efficient living. She had no idea what those volumes actually contained beyond daily observation, no understanding of the careful record I'd kept about our family's business, financial decisions, and important conversation. Some entries documented her own words, promises about my future care, agreements about living arrangement that she might prefer, weren't written down in permanent ink. But that was the beauty of handwritten record. No delete key, no easy editing, just honest documentation of what was actually said and when, by people who thought nobody was paying attention. The breaking point came during Robert's birthday celebration. Jessica arrived with a surprise announcement about plans they'd made without consulting me first. "We've been thinking about your living situation," Robert said, his voice careful and rehearsed. "This house is getting too much for you to manage alone. Too much to manage. The same house I'd maintained for 45 years without major problem, suddenly beyond my capabilities." According to their assessment, "We found a lovely senior community," Jessica added. "Maple Grove has beautiful apartment, all the maintenance included. You wouldn't need to worry about anything anymore." Wouldn't need to worry, because I'd have no control over daily decisions, no responsibility for my own life, no independence left to protect. "What about my journals?" I asked. "My writing routine, my personal space?" "You could keep writing," Jessica said quickly. "They probably have computer labs where residents can learn modern technology and digital skills. Computer labs for learning technology rather than continuing the method that had served me faithfully for over 4 decades. "We really think this is best," Robert said, "for your safety and our peace of mind." Stories like this remind us that clarity heals more than confrontation. Their peace of mind, not my happiness or comfort or preference, but their convenience and reduced worry about responsibility they didn't want to handle. "The house could be sold," Jessica continued. "Use that money for your care. Really make sure you're comfortable in your golden years." Golden year, as if being 79 automatically meant incompetent, as if age eliminated my right to make decisions about my own life and living arrangement. "We could help you pack," she offered. "Decide what's worth keeping and what should probably be donated to make room in your new smaller space." What's worth keeping? My entire life reduced to items that fit in someone else's idea of appropriate space for someone my age. I looked at my son's face, searching for the boy who'd loved my bedtime stories and birthday pancake, who'd valued family history and traditions that connected us. "Have you decided this already?" I asked. "Or am I part of the discussion?" "Of course you're part of it," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "We just want to explore options. Make sure you're prepared for whatever might come." That night, I sat with my journals, reading entries from happier times, when family meant support rather than management, when love built people up instead of tearing them down. Tomorrow I would show them what they'd overlooked in their rush to reorganize my life, what my careful documentation had preserved for exactly this moment. The next morning brought clarity, along with Jessica's arrival, with more boxes and organizing supplies, ready to tackle my clutter problem once and for all. "I brought extra storage containers," she announced. "Today we really sort through these journals and decide what's actually worth preserving, according to someone who'd never read them carefully, who saw only paper and ink, rather than family history and important documentation. We should probably start with the oldest ones," she continued. "See if there's anything your grandchildren might want someday, before we dispose of the rest." Dispose of the rest. 43 years of careful observation, reduced to items for disposal, if they didn't meet her standard of contemporary relevant. That's when I decided the time had come. Calm truth cuts deeper than loud accusation. "Jessica, before we make any decision," I said, "I think you should read something that might change your perspective." I walked to my journal collection and selected a volume from 3 years ago, the month when Robert and Jessica had visited to discuss their future plan. "This entry is from your last conversation about my living arrangements," I said, opening to a specific page. "You made some promises then that you might have forgotten." Jessica looked confused but curious. "What kind of promises?" I began reading in my clear voice, word for word documentation of a conversation that changed everything about their assumptions and my future. March 15th, Robert and Jessica visited today. We discussed what would happen if I ever needed more help. Jessica promised I would never be forced from my home against my will. Jessica's face grew pale as I continued reading her exact words, preserved in permanent ink, with witnesses and dates that couldn't be disputed or denied. "Some distances heal more than apologies," she said. "Family means supporting each other's choices, even when we don't understand them. That love means respecting independence, not eliminating it for convenience." The journal entry continued, with more promises and assurances about my right to remain in my own home as long as I was capable of making my own decisions. Robert agreed completely. I read on. Said his father would want me to stay where I'm happy. That moving me against my will would dishonor Dad's memory and everything he believed about family. Robert shifted uncomfortably, recognizing his own words from a conversation he'd forgotten, but I had carefully preserved. But the journal held more than broken promises. It contained financial information about my actual circumstances that Jessica had never bothered to investigate before making assumptions. April 2nd, met with financial advisor. Portfolio has grown significantly since Thomas died, more than enough for home care, if ever needed. Will update Robert next visit. Jessica stared at the numbers I'd carefully recorded, understanding, finally dawning about her assumption, about my financial vulnerability, about my need for their economic support and guidance. The journal documented other conversations too, about property values and inheritance plans, about legal arrangements Thomas had made to protect my independence from well-meaning family pressure. Thomas prepared for this possibility, I continued reading, that someone might try to convince me I'm incompetent. He left instructions with lawyers about protecting my right to make my own choices. Robert looked at the documentation, understanding finally that his father had been wiser than anyone realized about family dynamic and potential future conflicts. This is all written down? He asked quietly. Every conversation, every promise, every plan, I replied. 43 years of careful attention to what people actually say versus what they later claim they meant or intended. The silence stretched between us as they processed the implication of permanent documentation that couldn't be edited or explained away. This wasn't about punishment or humiliation. This was about truth and accountability, about honoring promises made in good faith when emotions weren't clouded by convenience. The silence that followed felt different from previous family discussion, this time weighted with truth rather than assumptions, with documentation rather than wishful thinking about the past. Jessica spoke first, her voice small. Margaret, I honestly forgot about those promises, about what we'd agreed regarding your future choices. I know you forgot, I replied gently. That's why I write everything down. Memory is fragile, but ink is permanent. Robert looked at the journal, understanding finally dawning about his father's wisdom in encouraging my daily writing, about the value of documentation beyond sentimental memories. Dad knew this might happen, he said quietly, that we might forget important things about what you wanted and what we'd promised to respect. Your father understood something crucial, I said, that taking care of someone doesn't mean taking control of them. That love should honor choices, not eliminate them for convenience. We spent the next hour talking honestly about promises and memory, about the difference between helping and managing someone you care about. Jessica apologized for dismissing my journal as meaningless clutter, for assuming they contained only random thoughts and daily observations. I can see now how important they are, she said, not just for memories, but for keeping us honest about what we've said and promised. And I was wrong about your financial situation, she added. I assumed you needed our support. Instead of checking the facts you'd carefully recorded. Some objects hold memories, not value. We talked about going forward differently, about reading before judging, about asking instead of assuming, about trusting my documentation of our family's history. I want to understand better, Jessica said. Would you mind if I read some of the entries about Robert's childhood? I'd love to know more about the boy I never met. And I want to remember, Robert added, the promises we made, the plans we'd agreed on. Before I started thinking, I knew better than about your own need. The journal collection stayed on my counter, no longer seen as clutter, but as family archive, worth preserving and consulting when memory failed or disputes arose. Over the following months, our relationships changed. Jessica started reading my journals with genuine interest, learning about family history she'd never bothered to explore. Robert visited more often, not to assess my condition, but to hear stories about his father and childhood that my journals preserved in vivid detail. I had no idea you document so much of our family life, he said. All these conversations and moments I'd completely forgotten. That's what journals are for, I replied. To remember what matters when life gets complicated and memory starts to fade. They brought the grandchildren sometimes to hear stories from my journals about their father's childhood and grandfather's wisdom, about family traditions worth preserving. Grandma's books are like time machines, my youngest grandson said. They take us back to when Dad was just a kid, like me. Christmas that year felt like celebration rather than obligation. Jessica brought me beautiful new journal for the next chapters of our family story. Robert's gift was a special pen for all the important things you'll write about us in the years to come. If this story touched something familiar, may your next chapter be softer than the last. I learned important lessons about documentation and family dynamics, about the value of paying attention to what people actually say versus what they later claim they meant or intended. Your voice matters, no matter your age. Your observations have value. Your right to record your life in your own words, your own way, should be protected and respected. Real love honors different methods of preserving and processing life. Real care supports choices, even when they seem old-fashioned. Real protection builds understanding, rather than eliminating differences. Memory is fragile, but truth endures. When written down with care, and consulted when needed, for clarity about promises made and forgotten in the rush of daily life and changing priorities, the handwritten word still has power in a digital world that deletes and edits and disappears at the touch of a button. Sometimes the old ways are the strongest ways to preserve what matters most.